Nathan Cole had been drifting through space for 17 days, and he was running out of time. His small shuttle called the Wanderer was tumbling slowly through the endless darkness between star systems. The lights inside the cockpit flickered every few minutes. The air recycler made a grinding noise that grew worse with each passing hour. The food packets were almost gone, and the water tank showed less than 2 days of supply remaining. He was 34 years old, and he had never felt so alone in his entire life. The battle at Meridian Station had been a disaster. Human ships fighting human ships while alien commanders watched from a safe distance. Nathan had seen his wingman explode in a ball of fire. He had watched 3 transport vessels full of civilian refugees get torn apart by missiles that did not care about innocence. He had fled when his own ship took damage because staying meant dying, and dying meant nothing to anyone anymore. Now he sat in the pilot seat of his crippled shuttle and stared at stars that did not care whether he lived or died. The war had been going on for 500 years. Nathan could not even imagine that much time. 5 centuries of killing and burning and destroying. The Korvathi Empire on one side with their blue-green scales and their cold yellow eyes. The Salanid Dominion on the other side with their crimson scales and their hatred that seemed to burn like fire. 2 ancient alien civilizations locked in a conflict, so old that nobody remembered why it started. Humanity had stumbled into this mess 40 years ago. Nathan's grandfather had been a young man when the first Korvathi ships appeared in human space. They had not come as conquerors at first. They had come as recruiters. They needed soldiers for their eternal war, and humans were good at fighting. Humans bred fast, and learned fast, and died fast. Perfect cannon fodder for a conflict. Between immortal empires, the Selenids had done the same thing on the other side of human space. They had taken colonies in the Orion region and conscripted every able-bodied man and woman they could find. Now, humans fought humans on alien battlefields wearing different colored uniforms and speaking the same language while they killed each other. Nathan had lost everything to this war. His younger brother Danny had been 19 years old when a Selenid bombardment hit his colony. The reports said he died quickly. Nathan did not believe the reports. Nothing in this war was quick or clean or merciful. His father had been conscripted 6 years ago. The Korvathi had needed experienced pilots, and they did not ask permission. They simply took him. 3 months later, Nathan received a message saying his father had died with honor in service to the Empire. The message did not say which battle or which star system or even which enemy had killed him. It did not matter to the Korvathi. One human was the same as another. His mother had lasted 2 more years after that. She stopped eating. She stopped talking. She sat by the window of their small apartment on New, Pennsylvania, and stared at the sky until one morning she simply did not wake up. The doctors called it natural causes. Nathan called it a broken heart. Now he was the last of his family, and he was going to die alone in the dark between stars that did not have names. On the 18th day, his sensors detected something. Nathan had been sleeping in the pilot's seat when the alarm woke him. His eyes were blurry and his mouth tasted like metal and his whole body ached from too many days without proper rest. He looked at the sensor display and blinked several times because he did not believe what he was seeing. A structure was emerging from fold space about 200 kilometers away. It was massive. Bigger than any space station Nathan had ever seen. Bigger than the Korvathi fortress that orbited their home world. Bigger than anything humans had ever built. But it was not Korvathi. The design was wrong. The angles were wrong. The symbols covering its surface were wrong. It was not Selenid either. Nathan had studied enough enemy vessels to recognize their architecture, and this was nothing like it. The structure looked old. Not old like a ship that had been in service for a few decades. Old like something that had been floating through space since before humans learned to make fire. Old like something that remembered when the stars were young. Nathan checked his databases and found no match. He checked the military archives and found nothing. He ran every identification protocol he knew and came up empty. The structure was unknown. completely and totally unknown. His shuttle was dying. His life support was failing. His food was gone, and his water was almost gone, and he had maybe 3 days before his air ran out completely. He could stay here and die in the familiar darkness of his cockpit, or he could take a chance on something that might kill him faster. Nathan was not ready to die. Not yet. Not like this. He fired his maneuvering thrusters and pointed his shuttle toward the massive structure. The engines coughed and sputtered, but they still worked well enough to push him forward. As he got closer, the structure grew larger and larger until it filled his entire viewport. He could see details now. Spires that reached toward the stars like fingers grasping at heaven. Docking bays that could hold 1,000 ships. Windows that glowed with faint blue light as if something inside was still alive after all these countless years. His shuttle found a docking port that seemed designed for vessels his size. The connection was automatic. Clamps reached out and grabbed his ship and pulled it gently into an airlock that hissed with ancient atmosphere. Nathan sat in his pilot's seat for a long moment. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding. He did not know what waited for him on the other side of that airlock, but he knew that his old life was over. Whatever happened next would be something new. He grabbed his emergency survival pack and his sidearm. When he walked to the airlock door, he took a deep breath of the stale air inside his shuttle. He pressed the button that opened the door. The air that rushed in was cold but breathable. The corridor beyond was lit by soft blue lights that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The walls were covered with symbols and images that Nathan did not recognize. Strange creatures, strange worlds, strange machines doing strange things. He stepped out of his shuttle and into the unknown. The station welcomed him like it had been waiting for him all along. Nathan walked through corridors that had not seen a living soul in thousands of years. The station was enormous. Every hallway led to another hallway. Every chamber opened into another chamber. The blue lights followed him wherever he went, as if the station itself was watching his movements and guiding his path. The air was thin but breathable, and it carried a strange smell, like old books and distant storms. He kept his hand on his sidearm, but he did not draw it. Something told him that weapons would be useless here. Whatever had built this place was so far beyond human technology that a pistol would be like throwing stones at a starship. The walls were covered with murals that told stories Nathan could not understand. He saw creatures with too many limbs fighting creatures with no limbs at all. He saw worlds being born and worlds being destroyed. He saw ships that looked like living things swimming through oceans of stars. And he saw 2 serpentine figures that appeared again and again in different poses and different situations. Sometimes the 2 figures stood together as allies. Sometimes they worked side by side building great machines. Sometimes they held each other like lovers or family or the closest of friends. But in other murals, they fought. They tore at each other with claws and teeth. They destroyed the things they had built together. They turned their weapons on each other and on everything around them. Nathan stopped in front of one particular mural and stared at it for a long time. The 2 serpentine figures were shown in great detail here. One had scales that shimmered blue-green in the painted light. The other had scales of deep crimson that seemed to glow with inner fire. He recognized them. He had seen those colors before. He had seen those shapes before, the Corvathi. The Selenids, they were here on this ancient station that predated both their empires by thousands of years. Nathan continued walking. The corridors grew wider and the ceilings grew higher. He passed through doorways that opened automatically at his approach and closed silently behind him. He climbed stairs that seemed to go on forever. He crossed bridges that spanned chasms so deep he could not see the bottom. Finally, he reached a chamber that was different from all the others. It was circular and vast. The ceiling was so high that it disappeared into darkness. The walls were lined with crystalline structures that glowed with soft blue light. Thousands of them, maybe millions. Each one humming with energy that Nathan could feel in his bones. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal made of BL, a CK stone. Above it floated a sphere of pure white light that pulsed slowly like a beating heart. Nathan approached the pedestal and the sphere. Descended until it hovered at eye level. He could see shapes moving inside it. Images flickering too fast to follow. Information waiting to be shared. A voice spoke inside his mind. It did not come through his ears. It simply appeared in his thoughts as if it had always been there. You are of the inheritors. The children we left behind. We have been waiting for you. Nathan stumbled backward in surprise. His hand went to his weapon, but he did not draw it. The voice was calm and gentle. It did not feel threatening. It felt sad. Who are you? He asked out loud, even though he knew the voice could hear his thoughts. We are the architects. We seeded this galaxy with life. We built the gates that connect the stars. We created the species that now fill the worlds we've prepared for them. And we made terrible mistakes that we could not fix before. We had to leave. The sphere pulsed brighter, and images began to appear in the air around Nathan. He saw the galaxy as it had been 10,000 years ago. He saw the architects themselves. Beings of light and energy that existed between dimensions. Powerful beyond imagination. Wise beyond measure. And yet still capable of errors that would echo through millennia. We created the Korath cell, the voice continued. A single species designed to be the caretakers of this region of space. They were meant to guide the younger races. To protect them. To help them grow. We gave them intelligence and strength and long lives. But we also gave them something we should not have given them. We gave them pride. The images showed the Korath cell as they had been in the beginning. A unified people with scales that shifted between blue, green, and crimson depending on their mood. They built great cities and great ships. They explored the stars and welcomed the species they found there. They were everything the architects had hoped they would be, but pride grew into arrogance. Arrogance grew into disagreement, and disagreement grew into hatred. A transmission came from us before we departed this dimension. It was meant to be a message of encouragement, a final blessing for our creations. But the Korath cell interpreted it in two different ways. Half of them believed it meant one thing. Half of them believed it meant another. And neither side would accept that they might be wrong. Nathan watched as the unified Korath cell split into two factions. The blue-green faction called themselves Korvathi. The crimson faction called themselves Selenids. They drew lines in the stars and declared each other enemies. They built weapons and armies and fortresses, and then they went to war. 500 years of death, the voice said. 500 years of suffering, and all of it based on a misunderstanding that could have been resolved in a single conversation if either side had been willing to listen. The images faded, and the sphere pulsed again. New information flowed into Nathan's mind. He saw genetic codes and biological locks. He saw how the architects had accidentally programmed aggression into the Korath cell DNA. He saw how that aggression had been amplified by the split and passed down through generations until hatred became instinct. We tried to fix it before we left. We could not. The damage was already done. But we left this station behind with the hope that someday someone would find it. Someone who could do what we could not. Someone who could end the war. Nathan felt the weight of those words pressing down on him. Why me? He asked. I am nobody. I am just a pilot who got lost in space. You are human, the voice replied. Your species is young and unbroken. You have not been poisoned by centuries of hatred. You can see what the Korvathi and Selenids cannot see. You can speak words they cannot speak. You can be the bridge between two peoples who have forgotten that they were once one. The sphere descended further and touched Nathan's forehead. Knowledge poured into him like water into an empty vessel. He learned the truth about the war. He learned the location of the convergence chamber where the leaders of both empires gathered to renew their vows of hatred. He learned how to remove the genetic locks that kept both species trapped in cycles of violence, and he learned that the next convergence was happening in 6 days. You have everything you need, the voice said. The choice is yours. You can leave this place and live out your days in hiding. Or you can try to end 500 years of war. We cannot tell you what to do. We can only give you the tools and hope that you will use them wisely. Nathan stood in the center of the archive, surrounded by the knowledge of a civilization that had shaped the galaxy. He thought about his brother Danny, who had died for nothing. He thought about his father, who had been taken for nothing. He thought about his mother, who had grieved herself to death for nothing. He thought about all the humans still, fighting and dying in a war that was never theirs to begin with. "I will do it," he said. This fear pulsed one final time and then faded away. Nathan Cole walked out of the archive carrying the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. Nathan spent 3 days in the archive preparing for what he had to do. The station provided him with everything he needed. Food appeared in dispensers that had not been used in 10,000 years. Water flowed from taps that should have been dry for centuries. A bed materialized in a chamber that seemed to know he needed rest. The architects had built this place to last. It had waited patiently for someone to come and use it. The knowledge in his mind was overwhelming at first. It felt like someone had poured an ocean into a cup. Names and dates and locations and secrets swirled around his thoughts until he could barely remember his own name. But slowly the chaos settled into order. The information organized itself into patterns he could understand. The archive had not just given him data. It had given him the ability to use that data. He learned to speak Korvathi. The words felt strange on his tongue at first. Harsh sounds and clicking consonants that human mouths were not designed to make. But the linguistic implant the archive had placed in his brain adjusted his vocal cords and softened the sounds until they flowed naturally. He learned to speak Selenid too. Their language was different, softer and more musical, with long vowels that seemed to sing rather than speak. The implant handled this just as easily. By the end of the second day, Nathan could switch between both languages without thinking about it. The archive also gave him tools. A personal cloaking device that bent light around his body and made him invisible to both eyes and sensors. It was small enough to fit in his palm, but powerful enough to fool the most advanced detection systems in the galaxy. A data crystal containing the original architect message, and all the proof he would need to show the truth. The crystal glowed with soft blue light when he held it. It felt warm against his skin, like it was alive. A genetic key that would allow him to access the convergence chamber. The chamber was protected by locks that only recognized Korvathi and Selenid DNA. But the key would fool those locks into thinking Nathan belonged there. It would open doors that had been closed to outsiders for 500 years. On the morning of the 4th day, Nathan walked to the docking bay, where his shuttle waited. But he did not board the Wanderer. The archive had shown him something better. A Korvathi patrol ship sat in a bay that had been sealed for millennia. It was old, but not ancient. The archive explained that this ship had docked here centuries ago. Its crew had come seeking knowledge just as Nathan had, but they had not been ready for what they found. They had fled in terror, leaving their ship behind. Nathan climbed aboard and found the system still functional. The archive had maintained everything in perfect condition. The engines hummed to life when he touched the controls. The navigation computer accepted his commands without question. The weapons systems armed themselves and waited for targets. He flew out of the station and into the void. The journey to Etchen would take 2 days at maximum speed. Nathan pushed the engines as hard as they would go. He had no time to waste. The convergence would happen with or without him, and if he missed it, he would have to wait another 100 years. For the next one, he flew through contested space where battles raged between Korvathi and Selenid fleets. He saw explosions in the distance. He saw debris fields that had once been ships full of living beings. He saw escape pods tumbling through the darkness with no one coming to rescue them. And he saw human ships on both sides. A Korvathi carrier launched fighters with human pilots. A Selenid destroyer opened fire with human gunners manning the weapons. Humans killing humans while they're alien. Masters watched and counted the dead-like numbers on a screen. Nathan gripped the controls of his stolen ship and felt anger burning in his chest. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. Humanity had done nothing to deserve this fate. They had simply been in the wrong place when 2 ancient empires decided they needed more bodies to throw at each other. He would end this. He had to end this. Not just for himself, but for every human who had ever been forced to fight in a war that was not theirs. The moon called. Chen appeared on his sensors after 37 hours of travel. It was small and gray and lifeless. No atmosphere, no water. No reason for anyone to care about it except for what lay beneath its surface. Nathan found a crater 3 kilometers from the entrance to the convergence chamber. He landed his ship and powered down the engines. He checked his equipment one final time. Cloaking device charge. D and ready. Data crystal secure in his pocket. Genetic key hanging from a chain around his neck. He put on his emergency suit and stepped out onto the surface of the moon. The walk was long and quiet. His boots left prints in dust that had not been disturbed in decades. The stars above him were bright and cold and impossibly distant. He could see the Korvathi fortress world hanging in the sky to his left. He could see the Selenid colony glowing to his right. 2 enemies staring at each other across a void that neither could cross. The entrance to the convergence chamber was carved into the side of a mountain. Ancient symbols marked the doorway. Symbols that Nathan now recognized as architect writing. They said, "Welcome to all who seek peace." They said, "Death to all who bring war." Nathan activated his cloaking, his device, and vanished from sight. The doors recognized his genetic key and slid open without a sound. He stepped inside and found himself in a tunnel that sloped downward into the heart of the moon. Lights flickered to life as he walked. The air grew warmer. The silence grew heavier. After what felt like hours, he reached the chamber itself. It was vast. A circular room with a domed ceiling that glowed with artificial starlight. 2 raised platforms stood on opposite sides of the room. One for the Korvathi delegation, one for the Selenids. Between them, a central stage held. 2 thrones and a pedestal with an ancient blade resting on top. Delegates were already arriving. Nathan pressed himself against the wall and watched as Korvathi officials took their places on the left platform. Their scales shimmered blue-green under the lights. Their eyes were cold and yellow and filled with centuries of hatred. The Selenids arrived next. They were shorter and broader than the Korvathi. Their crimson scales seemed to absorb the light around them. They moved with careful precision, and they watched their enemies with eyes that burned like embers. Bodyguards surrounded both groups. Weapons were visible everywhere. Translators worked constantly to ensure that every whispered insult was properly understood by the other side. Nathan found a spot in the shadows near the central stage. He could see everything from here. The thrones, where the leaders would sit. The pedestal where the ceremonial blade waited. The ancient systems that controlled the chamber, he waited. The High Sovereign of the Korvathi Empire entered through a private door. He was tall, even for his species. His scales were darker than the others. A crown of black metal sat upon his head. He walked to his throne and sat without looking at anyone. The prime archon of the Selenid. Dominion entered through another door. She was old, but her eyes were sharp. Her scales had faded to a pale crimson, but they still glowed with inner fire. She took her throne and stared across the chamber at her enemy. The ceremony was about to begin. Nathan checked his equipment one more time. The data crystal was ready. The chamber systems would respond to its signal. All he had to do was wait for the right moment, and then he would change the galaxy forever. The ceremony began with silence. Every voice in the chamber went quiet. Every movement stopped. The Korvathi delegates stood frozen on their platform. The Selenid representatives did the same on theirs. All eyes turned to the 2 thrones at the center of the room, where the leaders of both empires sat facing each other with hatred older than human civilization. A priest stepped forward from the Korvathi side. He was ancient and bent with age. His scales had faded to a pale green that looked almost gray. He carried a scroll made from some kind of animal skin, and he unrolled it with trembling hands. He began to read in the old Korvathi tongue. Nathan understood every word thanks to the implant in his brain. The priest recited the crimes of the Selenid people. He listed the worlds they had destroyed. He named the heroes they had killed. He spoke of atrocities committed centuries ago as if they had happened yesterday. The reading took almost an hour. The Selenids listened without moving. Their faces showed no emotion, but Nathan could see the tension in their bodies. Their hands twitched toward weapons that protocol forbade them from drawing. When the Corvathi priest finished, a Selenid priestess stepped forward. She was just as old as her counterpart. Her crimson scales had faded to a dull rust color. She carried her own scroll, and she read it in the musical language of her people. The Selenid list of grievances was just as long, just as detailed, just as filled with pain and anger and the desire for revenge. Nathan listened and felt the weight of 500 years pressing down on the room like a physical force. Another hour passed. When both readings were complete, the High Sovereign rose from his throne. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. He spoke the words that his ancestors had spoken for 5 centuries, the words that renewed the war for another 100 years. We declare eternal enmity against the Selenid corruption. We declare our sacred duty to cleanse the stars of their presence. We declare that this war shall continue until the last of their kind draws breath. So it was spoken by our fathers. So it is spoken by us. So it shall be spoken by our children until the end of time. The Prime Archon rose to answer. Her voice was softer, but no less powerful. It carried across the chamber like fire spreading through dry grass. We declare undying hatred for the Corvathi abomination. We declare our righteous mission to purge the galaxy of their heresy. We declare that this war shall continue until the final Corvathi heart stops beating. This is the oath of our mothers. This is our oath. This shall be the oath of our daughters until the stars grow cold. Both leaders stepped toward the pedestal at the center of the stage. The ceremonial blade waited for them. It was old and tarnished, but still sharp. For 500 years, the leaders of both empires had cut their palms with this blade and mixed their blood on the ancient stone, a ritual that bound their peoples to another century of killing. The High Sovereign reached for the blade. Nathan deactivated his cloaking device and stepped into the light. The reaction was instant and violent. Bodyguards surged forward with weapons drawn. Delegates screamed in shock and outrage. The High Sovereign stumbled backward with fear in his yellow eyes. The Prime Archon raised her hand to signal her guards to hold their fire. A human. A single human standing in the most sacred chamber of 2 ancient empires. Standing where no outsider had stood in 500 years. Standing as if he had every right to be there, Nathan raised his hands to show he carried no weapon. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. His legs wanted to run, but he forced them to stay still. Everything depended on the next few minutes. "I am Nathan Cole," he said in perfect Corvathi. Then he repeated it in perfect Selenid. "I am a human, a child of the architects just as you are. And I have come to show you the truth that has been hidden from you for 5 centuries. The High Sovereign found his voice. "How dare you?" he roared. "How dare a conscript species defile this sacred place? Kill him. Kill him now." The bodyguards moved forward, but the Prime Archon raised her hand again. "Wait," she commanded. Her eyes were fixed on Nathan with an expression he could not read. "Let him speak. I want to hear what truth a human thinks he can teach us." Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out the data crystal. It glowed with soft blue light in his palm. The ancient systems of the chamber recognized it immediately. Holographic projectors hummed to life. The air above the pedestal shimmered and then filled with images. The delegates watched in stunned silence as the history of their species unfolded before them. They saw the architects, beings of light and energy that had shaped the galaxy. They saw the creation of the Korath cell, a single unified species designed to be caretakers of the stars. They saw themselves as they had been before the split. One people with scales that shifted between blue-green and crimson. One culture. One family. They saw the message that had divided them. The final transmission from the architects before they departed this dimension. Nathan played it for them in the original language. He showed them how the same words could be interpreted in 2 different ways. He showed them how a simple misunderstanding had grown into hatred that consumed everything it touched, They saw the genetic locks that had been accidentally programmed into their DNA. Biological switches that amplified aggression and tribalism. Flaws that had been passed down through generations until violence became instinct. And they saw the architects themselves, recording after recording of ancient beings apologizing for what they had done, begging their creations to find peace, leaving behind the tools to fix what had been broken. The images faded. Nathan stood, alone in the center of the chamber with every eye fixed on him. The silence was so complete, he could hear his own breathing echoing off the walls. "You are not enemies," he said. His voice was steady even though his hands were shaking. "You are family. You were made to be partners. You were made to care for this galaxy together. Every death in this war has been a tragedy. Every destroyed world has been a crime. And all of it has been based on a mistake that could have been corrected 500 years ago if anyone had been willing to listen." The High Sovereign stepped forward. His face was twisted with emotions Nathan could not name. "Even if this is true," he said slowly, "even if everything you have shown us is real, how do we undo 500 years of hatred? How do we tell our people that their ancestors died for nothing?" "You tell them the truth," Nathan replied. "You tell them that the war is over. Not because one side won, but because both sides finally understand. You tell them that the future matters more than the past. You tell them that it is time to come home." The Prime Archon looked at the High Sovereign. For the first time in 5 centuries, the leaders of the Korvathi and Selenid people looked at each other without hatred in their eyes. The chamber waited. The galaxy waited. Everything waited for what would happen next. The silence lasted for what felt like an eternity. Nathan stood in the center of the chamber. With his heart pounding and his breath caught in his throat, he had done everything he could. He had shown them the truth. He had given them the proof. Now the decision belonged to them. The High Sovereign turned to look at his delegates. They stared back at him with confusion and fear and something else. Something that looked almost like hope. For 500 years they had been told that the Selenids were monsters, creatures without honor or mercy. Enemies that had to be destroyed no matter the cost. Now they were being told that everything they believed was a lie. The Prime Archon faced her own people. The Selenid delegates whispered among themselves. Some of them looked angry. Some of them looked lost. Some of them had tears running down their faces, though they tried to hide them. The High Sovereign spoke first. His voice was quiet now. All the thunder had gone out of it. He sounded like an old man who had just learned that his entire life had been built on sand. "My father died in this war," he said. "His father died in this war, and his father before him. Generations of my family have given their blood to destroy the Selenids. How can I tell my son that all of it meant nothing?" The Prime Archon answered him. Her voice was just as quiet, just as tired, just as filled with pain. "My daughter commands a fleet on the border," she said. "She has killed thousands of your people. She believes she is fighting for justice, for honor, for everything our ancestors taught us to value. How do I tell her that she has been murdering her own cousins?" Nathan stepped forward. He did not know where he found the courage to speak, but the words came anyway. "You tell them that the past cannot be changed," he said. "You tell them that the dead are gone and nothing will bring them back. But you also tell them that the future is not written yet. You tell them that every life saved from this moment forward is a victory. You tell them that ending the war does not dishonor the dead. It honors them. It means their sacrifice was not entirely in vain because it led to this moment. This choice, this chance to finally make things right." The High Sovereign looked at Nathan for a long moment. His yellow eyes were unreadable. Then he turned to face the Prime Archon. "I am tired," he said. "I have been tired for so long, I forgot what it felt like to be anything else. I have sent millions to their deaths. I have ordered the destruction of worlds. I have done terrible things in the name of a war that I now learn was never real. If there is a way to end this, I want to find it. Not for myself. I am old, and my time is short. But for the children who have not yet been born into this madness." The Prime Archon nodded slowly. She reached up and removed the crown from her head. It was a simple thing. A band of red metal set with stones that glowed like fire. She held it in her hands and looked at it as if seeing it for the first time. "This crown has been passed down through 43 generations," she said. "Every Archon who wore it swore to continue the war until victory. I was prepared to pass it to my daughter with the same oath. But I do not want her to carry this burden. I do not want her children to carry it either. If peace is possible, then I choose peace." She set the crown down on the pedestal next to the ceremonial blade. The High Sovereign removed his own crown, black metal set with yellow stones. He placed it beside hers. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted in confusion and outrage. Bodyguards looked at each other, uncertain of what to do. Priests clutched their scrolls and wailed about tradition and honor and sacred oaths. But beneath all the noise, Nathan could hear something else. He could hear relief. He could hear hope. He could hear the sound of chains breaking after 500 years. The negotiations began that very night. Nathan served as the mediator. He was the only neutral party in the room, the only one who belonged to neither empire and owed loyalty to neither crown. Both sides trusted him because he had nothing to gain from their conflict and everything to lose. Human diplomats were summoned from both conscript populations, men and women who had spent their lives fighting for masters. They did not choose arrived at the convergence chamber to help draft the terms of peace. They brought with them the perspective of a species that had suffered under both empires. They reminded everyone in the room that the Korvathi and Selunids were not the only ones affected by this war. The talks lasted for 3 weeks. There were arguments. There were threats. There were moments when everything nearly fell apart. Old hatreds do not disappear overnight. 500 years of propaganda and violence had left scars that would take generations to heal. But every time the negotiations reached a breaking point, someone would remember the images Nathan had shown them. Someone would remember that they were family, and they would keep talking. The final agreement was signed on the 22nd day. The Korvathi Empire and the Salanid Dominion agreed to an immediate ceasefire. All military operations would stop within 48 hours. All prisoners of war would be released. All occupied territories would be returned to their original inhabitants. They agreed to form a joint council to govern the transition period. Representatives from both species would work together to address grievances and prevent new conflicts from arising. The council would have equal numbers from each side, and decisions would require consensus. They agreed to release all conscripted species immediately. Humans and the dozen other races that had been forced to fight in the war would be given full freedom. They would receive reparations for their suffering. They would be granted seats on the new governing council as equal partners. And they agreed to something that no one had expected. They agreed to reunify. Not immediately. Not completely. But they agreed to begin the process of healing the divide that had split the Korath cell into 2 warring factions. They would study the genetic locks and find ways to remove them. They would teach their children the true history of their people. They would build a future where Korvathi and Selenid were just 2 words for the same family. Nathan Cole was offered the position of First Human, ambassador to the Unified Kora Cell Confederation. He did not want it. He was a pilot, not a diplomat. He had stumbled into this role by accident, and he had no training for the responsibilities it would bring, but he accepted anyway. He accepted because someone had to. He accepted because humanity needed a voice in the new order being built. He accepted because his brother and his father and his mother deserved to have their deaths mean something. When reporters asked him how it felt to be called the man who ended a 500-year war, he shook his head. "I did not end anything," he said. "I just showed them the truth." They ended the war themselves. They chose to listen. They chose to change. That took more courage than anything I did. I just opened a door. They are the ones who walked through it. He thought about Danny, who would have been 27 years old this year. He thought about his father, who had loved flying more than anything except his family. He thought about his mother, who had held their home together until grief finally broke her. He hoped they could see what had grown from the seeds of their loss. The war was over. Humanity was free, and Nathan Cole stood at the beginning of a new age, watching the stars shine brighter than they ever had before.